Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Happy 2022, happy New Year, happy Christmas, all that good stuff. So I thought I'd start the year, with another crime video. Now I'm not going to keep doing crime videos because for every single video, just because they're kind of like dark and after a while it kind of gets too embedded in my brain, So I think I need to take a break from crime videos. And this particular one, just so everyone is aware, it's pretty dark. So I'm not going to go into like heavy detail because some of the stuff is just fucked up. So I don't want to alienate anyone from my channel. So, but anyone that's here to watch my 5th video, thank you for continuing to watch my channel. It's very much appreciated. It's always appreciated. But I hope everyone had a happy Christmas. And yeah, COVID's a bitch, isn't it? COVID's a real bitch. And hopefully this video will distract you from COVID, so you can think about murder and crime instead of, people dying and vaccinations and all that good stuff, Thanks for watching, and I will get on with the video because that's what you guys deserve. This is what you guys want. This is what I'm here for, to provide you with content. Also, I'm in isolation for a few days, so I have no choice but to make a video. In the 1970s in Times Square, New York, there was some sort of a sexual revolution going on. Now, some people would argue that it was more of a de-evolution of feminism and women's rights, which I would be more inclined to agree with, because with all this pornography, peep shows, live sex shows and prostitution came a lot of crime, and a lot of women were abused and murdered during this time period. It was certainly a breeding ground for killers, rapists and any sort of despicable scumbag you can think of would lurk down to these parts in Times Square late at night. And unfortunately for the women who received the abuse, they'd be too afraid to go to the police because, one, they were being controlled by their pimps, but also because they would be arrested for prostitution, which, if they were arrested for prostitution, even if they didn't go to prison, they would be marked on their record, which would make it very hard for them to get a loan or a credit score or a job. So women during this time period, unfortunately, were abused, kept their mouths shut because they really had no other choice. A lot of these women were kind of lured in by pimps to make easy money, and then once they were lured in, they couldn't escape. My heart goes out to the women during this time period, and on top of the fact that they weren't protected by the police, they also had to deal with the fact that it was a breeding ground for a lot of different type of killers that were out there during the time. Like during the 70s and 80s, it was a boom for serial killers in America. It had the most recorded killers during that time in American history. So it was a scary time for them. Every night they went out, they were taking their lives in their own hands, and they were not protected. So these women were forced to have sex with men, and the problem with these peep shows and these sex live shows is that the women were treated very aggressively, and the combination of aggression and sexuality made men see these women as just objects, so they were treated like dog shit. But it was the perfect formula for these killers to come in, and just like the killer I'm going to talk about today, this was his breeding ground. This is where he would get his victims from. On December 2nd, 1979, the first victim would be found by firemen in a hotel in Times Square, New York. This would give the famous killer his nickname, the Torso Killer. The reason why he was called the Torso Killer was because the victims were found with their bodies badly burnt and their head and feet missing. So that would obviously indicate that this particular killer was trying to hide any sort of evidence of who these people were. Now, one woman was a woman by the name of Odile, while the other woman was never identified. It's also important to note as well that they were never able to recover the heads or feet that were missing from the crime scene. NYPD detectives at the time also stated that the women were tortured and brutally assaulted and sexually assaulted before they were murdered, and also that the particular killer was very clever because there was very little evidence that could connect anyone to the particular crime. So this was the start of a number of killings by the Torso Killer. This particular man was a very sadistic, very fucked up individual who clearly took a lot of joy in hurting women and abusing women. But this was the start of a series of killings that would go on in both New York City and in New Jersey. And it would take the police a long time to connect the dots between the New York killings and the New Jersey killings, because this particular killer liked to pick up his women from New York and bring them to New Jersey at a hotel called the Quality Inn. So on May 5th, 1980, approximately 5 months after the first murder, another victim would surface. This time it was a woman by the name of Valerie Ann Street. She was found handcuffed under the bed by a maid the following morning. So the killer did make one crucial mistake, which would come back to haunt him, and he left a fingerprint on the handcuff he used on this particular woman. It was clear that this woman was again tortured, assaulted, both verbally and physically, for hours before she was eventually murdered. So now unfortunately this fingerprint was checked by Barton police, who were the police department in New Jersey at the time, and they did not come to any sort of matches because this particular killer wasn't on their system. So at this point in time there was crimes in New York and New Jersey. However, one detective for the New Jersey police did remember a case of a woman who was murdered 2 years prior by the name of Marianne Carr. Marianne Carr was found in a very similar situation in the hotel where she was murdered, with handcuffs as well. So they were able to connect those two cases, so they knew they had some sort of sadistic piece of shit. He would then go back to New York City, where he would murder yet again a woman by the name of Jean Rayner in the Seville Hotel in New York near Times Square. So again, the NYPD would have been investigating this particular case. Now this is where he gets a bit more fucked up and a bit more ballsy with police. He would cut off the breasts of this victim and leave them sitting up on a mantle as some sort of like trophy to the police. It wouldn't be until the eventual attempted murder of Leslie Ann Odile, who was a 19-year-old prostitute who was trying to run away from her pimp. She was a prostitute working in Times Square. She was picked up by this serial killer. He brought her for drinks, to which he drugged her, and then brought her back to a motel to have sex with her. Again, the Quality Inn motel. In this particular case, the man did torture and handcuff this woman. He did sexually assault her, he did abuse her for hours on end, and it wasn't until screaming was heard from the room that a maid knocked on the door. At this point in time, the killer made the victim tell the maid that everything was okay, but the maid knew that something was wrong, so she did call the police. Once the police were called, this particular killer panicked and tried to escape, to which he was arrested. At this point in time, police didn't know that this man had also committed the other crimes, but his MO did fit other cases. Now, who was this man? Well, this man was a 33-year-old by the name of Richard Cottingham. He was a computer expert working in Manhattan. He was a regular looking dude, you know, he was married, he had 3 kids. He was known for going out late at night, and his wife never really knew what he was doing. Now, she would later learn that he was going out with sex workers and would divorce him, but she wasn't aware of the other heinous crimes he was committing. Now, at first, Cottingham denied any sort of responsibility, claiming that he paid for an S&M type situation with this particular prostitute. Now, the police realised that his MO with this woman would connect him to the other cases, and once they got his fingerprints, they were able to connect him to the murder of Marianne Carr that he committed 2 years prior. But then they started looking into other unsolved crimes of rape and attempted assault. But again, police found it very hard in New Jersey to get women to talk to them because they were afraid of prosecution. But the police did promise them they would not be prosecuted for being prostitutes. So women did come forward and explained how this man committed the crimes. So we learned through these women the way this man worked, and it's pretty fucked up. So his general method would be to pick up these women in New York City, generally Times Square. He would then bring them for drinks, and he would use a date rape drug to drug them. He would bring them generally back to the Quality Inn hotel. Luckily for a lot of these women who managed to get away before he was able to finish the crime. And at this point, New Jersey media were picking up a lot of the story, and that got the NYPD's attention. The NYPD then would get in touch with the New Jersey Police Department in Barton, and they would then work on the cases together. When they did a search of his home, which was very close to the Quality Inn where he committed a lot of his crimes, they did find a apartment key that belonged to Marianne Carr. They did also find jewellery that belonged to a victim he would murder named Miss Rayner in New York City near Times Square yet again. So these two pieces of evidence would be a strong indication that this man had committed a lot of heinous, disgusting crimes. Now, he vigorously denied any sort of connection to these crimes. Even with the testimony from the victims who he did not murder, he claimed that they were lying. He claimed that the police had framed him, and he did eventually go to court. Even though the evidence was there and the testimony was there, the women were also able to pick him out of a lineup while they were being questioned by police about the crimes. Cottingham thought he could manipulate the jury into thinking that these sex workers were degenerates, that they would lie for attention, but unfortunately for him it would not work. In May 1981 he would be convicted and he would be sentenced to nearly 200 years in prison. So a year later he would also be convicted of second degree murder of Marianne Carr and be given another 20 years in prison. So in an interview in 2009, Cottingham would admit to killing those women and would explain why he killed those women.
It's scary to a girl to have something done like that, to be so close to a knife, so to speak, pressed against you. The situations that I was seeking were more of a power trip. The power of holding someone's fate in your hands is a very powerful aphrodisiac. The adrenaline rush is like nothing. I mean, you're in complete control of somebody's destiny.
So as you can see, he's clearly a sadistic piece of shit. He takes quite a lot of pride in his murders, and I purposely didn't go into too much detail in terms of the crimes he committed, just because it's so fucked up and it's so disheartening. It kind of really helps you kind of lose any faith in humanity when you realize people like this exist. And I feel nothing but sorrow for those women who were murdered, and also for the sex workers during that time in the 1970s that had to put up with the abuse and bullshit that they did have to put up with. It's pretty disgusting, and it's one of the hardest things I kind of had to wrap my head around while researching this stuff. So thankfully this sadistic piece of shit is still in prison. He's still alive, he's 75 years old. He's been in prison now for over 40 years. Based off the interviews that I've just shared, he doesn't seem to have learned his lesson, he doesn't seem to have changed. So he belongs in prison, and I hope he's buried under the prison when he's fucking dead. Thanks so much for everyone that is subscribed, that likes and shares these videos. It does mean a lot, as I keep saying, and I hope you continue to watch and enjoy, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Happy New Year. Hopefully 2022 will be better than 2021 or 2020. Maybe we won't have to wear these masks forever, but stay safe, look after each other, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.